Did you know that the person who will destroy your life might be sitting at your dinner table right now, calling you Grandma with the sweetest smile you've ever seen? I never thought I'd be the kind of woman telling this story. My name is Dorothy Mae Washington, and for 72 years, I believed that family meant everything. I believed that blood was thicker than water, that love conquered all, and that the children you raise with your own hands would never turn those same hands against you. I was wrong about everything. 3 months ago, I was living in the house my late husband Jerome and I had built together over 45 years of marriage. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours, a modest 2-story home in Oakland with a garden where I grew tomatoes and roses, and a front porch where Jerome used to sit reading his newspaper every Sunday morning. The house smelled like vanilla candles and the lavender sachets I kept in every drawer, and the walls were covered with family photos spanning decades. I thought I knew every face in those pictures. I thought I knew their hearts. Today, as I sit in this cramped studio apartment with walls so thin I can hear my neighbor's television through the night, I realize how naive I was. The woman in those family photos, the one always smiling in the background, always serving others, always putting everyone else's needs first, that woman no longer exists. She died the day I discovered that my own granddaughter, my precious little Keisha, who used to braid my hair and tell me I was her favorite person in the world, had been planning my destruction for over 2 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a 72-year-old retired school teacher who never hurt a soul in her life became the target of the most elaborate betrayal I could never have imagined. Because this story isn't just about what they did to me. It's about what I did back to them when I finally opened my eyes and realized that sometimes the people who smile the widest are the ones sharpening the knife behind their backs. It started with small things, as betrayals often do. After Jerome passed from diabetes complications last spring, Keisha began visiting more frequently. At first, I was grateful. At 28, she was successful, working as a financial advisor downtown, always dressed in sharp business suits and carrying leather briefcases that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She'd arrive every Thursday evening with takeout from expensive restaurants, insisting that I needed to eat better, that cooking for myself was too much work for someone my age. I remember the first time she brought up my finances. We were sitting at my kitchen table, the same oak table where I'd helped her with homework when she was little, where Jerome and I had shared thousands of meals, where I'd signed Christmas cards and birthday invitations for decades. The late evening sun was streaming through my yellow curtains, casting warm shadows across her face as she pulled out a tablet and began tapping the screen with manicured fingernails. "Grandma Dorothy," she said, her voice soft and caring, "I've been thinking about your situation here. This house is so big for just you, and with Grandpa Jerome gone, the upkeep must be overwhelming." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, her skin soft and warm against my weathered fingers. "I worry about you being here alone, especially at night." I felt a flutter of anxiety in my chest, the kind I'd been experiencing since Jerome's death, whenever anyone mentioned my living situation. "I managed just fine, baby girl," I told her, using the nickname I'd called her since she was 3 years old. "This house has been my home for over 4 decades. Your grandfather's spirit is in every room, every corner. I can't imagine being anywhere else." Keisha nodded sympathetically, but I noticed something in her eyes, a flash of impatience maybe, or calculation. It was so brief, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. "I understand that, Grandma. I really do. But I've been researching some beautiful senior communities nearby, places where you'd have people your own age, activities, medical care on site if you need it. No more worrying about lawn maintenance or fixing leaky faucets or climbing those steep stairs to your bedroom." The way she said it made it sound so reasonable, so caring. She painted pictures of my future that seemed bright and carefree. Book clubs and bridge games, maintenance-free living, new friendships with other widows who would understand my grief. She even showed me glossy brochures on her tablet, virtual tours of facilities that looked more like luxury hotels than nursing homes. "These places are expensive, though," I said, scrolling through images of pristine dining rooms and landscaped courtyards. "I'm not sure my savings would cover something like this." That's when Keisha's expression brightened in a way that should have warned me if I'd been paying attention. "Actually, Grandma, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. You're sitting on a gold mine with this house. The Oakland real estate market has exploded in the past few years. A property like this, in this neighborhood, with this much character, you could easily get $800,000, maybe more. $800,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Jerome and I had bought this house for $42,000 in 1979, stretching every penny of our savings for the down payment. The idea that it was now worth nearly $1 million seemed impossible, like someone telling me I'd won the lottery without buying a ticket. That much money would set you up for life, Keisha continued, her voice taking on the professional tone I'd heard her use when talking to clients on the phone. A nice senior community would cost maybe $4,000 a month, which sounds like a lot, but with $800,000 invested properly, you'd never have to worry about money again. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life, and there would still be plenty left over for your family. For your family. Those 3 words hung in the air between us, carrying weight I didn't fully understand at the time. Now I realize they were the key to everything that followed. The casual suggestion that my financial decisions should benefit not just me, but the people who would inherit whatever was left when I died. Over the following weeks, Keisha's visits became more frequent and more focused. She'd arrive with new information about senior communities, printed materials about reverse mortgages and estate planning, and increasingly urgent concerns about my safety and well-being. She started pointing out things I'd never noticed before. How the front steps were cracked and could cause a fall. How the upstairs bathroom faucet dripped constantly. How the neighborhood was changing and becoming less safe for elderly residents. "I saw a police car on your street yesterday," she told me one evening as we sat on my front porch watching the sunset. "Mrs. Henderson next door said there was a break-in 3 blocks over. They targeted an elderly woman living alone, just like you." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The neighborhood had always felt safe to me. I knew most of my neighbors by name, and we looked out for each other. But Keisha's words planted seeds of doubt that began growing in the quiet moments when I was alone, especially during the long hours after midnight, when every creak of the old house settling made me wonder if someone was trying to break in. She also began bringing her boyfriend Marcus to our Thursday dinners. Marcus was a smooth-talking man in his early 30s who worked in real estate and always seemed to have inside information about property values and market trends. He'd compliment my house with the practiced eye of someone who knew exactly what it was worth, commenting on the original hardwood floors, the vintage fixtures, the solid construction that didn't exist in modern homes. "Mrs. Washington," he said one evening as we finished dessert, "your granddaughter has excellent instincts about real estate. This property is only going to increase in value, but there's a window of opportunity right now where the market is especially hot for homes like yours. If you were thinking about selling, now would be the perfect time." The way he and Keisha exchanged glances across my dining room table should have set off alarm bells. The way they seemed to have rehearsed their talking points, the way they tag-teamed their arguments about my future, the way they both seemed more interested in my house than in my well-being. All of it should have warned me that something wasn't right. But I was lonely, and I was grieving, and they were offering me attention and care at a time when I felt invisible to most of the world. When you're a 72-year-old widow, people stop seeing you as a person with your own agency and start seeing you as a problem to be solved or a burden to be managed. Keisha and Marcus made me feel like my decisions mattered, like my future was worth investing in, like someone cared about my happiness. I started researching the senior communities they'd recommended, visiting websites late at night when I couldn't sleep, reading testimonials from residents who claimed to be living their best lives in these carefully managed environments. The places did look beautiful. Elegant apartments with full kitchens and spacious living areas, communal spaces designed for socializing, fitness centers, and libraries and art studios. The idea of not having to worry about home maintenance, of having medical care readily available, of being surrounded by people my own age who might understand the particular loneliness of widowhood. It all began to seem appealing. But every time I tried to imagine actually leaving this house, my chest would tighten with panic. This was where Jerome and I had brought Keisha home from the hospital, when my daughter Denise was too young and overwhelmed to care for a newborn. This was where we'd celebrated every birthday, every holiday, every milestone. The kitchen walls still bore faint marks where I'd measured Keisha's height as she grew, and Jerome's reading glasses were still in the drawer of his bedside table, waiting for him to come back and claim them. "Change is hard, Grandma," Keisha said during one of our conversations about my hesitation. But sometimes we have to let go of the past to embrace a better future. Grandpa Jerome wouldn't want you to stay here out of obligation to his memory. He'd want you to be happy and safe. She was right, of course. Jerome had always been practical about these things, always focused on what made sense rather than what felt sentimental. If he were still alive, he probably would have been the first to suggest that a house this size was impractical for one person, that my money could be better invested, that I deserved to spend my remaining years focused on enjoyment rather than maintenance and upkeep. So I began the process slowly, almost reluctantly. I contacted a realtor recommended by Marcus, a sharp woman named Patricia who walked through my house taking measurements and photos, pointing out features that would appeal to buyers and suggesting minor improvements that could increase the sale price. I toured 3 different senior communities, comparing amenities and costs, trying to imagine myself living in spaces that felt more like hotel rooms than homes. The one I finally chose was called Sunset Gardens, a sprawling complex about 20 minutes from my old neighborhood. The apartments were spacious and modern, with large windows overlooking landscaped gardens, full kitchens for residents who wanted to cook, and a dining room that served 3 meals a day for those who preferred not to. There was a library stocked with bestsellers and classics, a fitness center with equipment designed for seniors, and organized activities ranging from book clubs to pottery classes to day trips to local museums. The monthly fee was $3,800, which included everything except personal expenses. With the sale of my house, I'd have enough money invested to cover those costs for at least 15 years, with a substantial cushion for unexpected medical expenses or inflation. On paper, it was a smart financial decision that would ensure my security and comfort for the rest of my life. Keisha was ecstatic when I told her about my decision. She hugged me tighter than she had since she was a child, tears in her eyes, as she told me how proud she was of my courage, how excited she was for this new chapter in my life, how much peace of mind she'd have knowing I was safe and cared for. "You're going to love it there, Grandma Dorothy," she said, holding my hands as we sat in my living room surrounded by packing boxes. "And think about how much more time we'll be able to spend together when you don't have to worry about all this house maintenance. We can take those cooking classes you've always talked about, or travel to visit Aunt Denise in Atlanta." The sale of my house happened faster than I'd expected. Patricia had been right about the market. We received multiple offers within the first week, including one that was $50,000 over the asking price. The buyers were a young couple with twin toddlers who fell in love with the neighborhood and the character of the house, who promised to maintain the garden and preserve the original features that Jerome and I had carefully maintained over the decades. Signing the final papers felt like signing my own death certificate. I sat in the title company office with Keisha beside me, watching as my signature transferred ownership of my life's biggest investment to strangers. The check they handed me was larger than any amount of money I'd ever seen. $785,000 after fees and commissions, enough to secure my future in ways I'd never imagined possible. But as we walked out of that office together, check in hand, I felt an emptiness that had nothing to do with saying goodbye to my house. Something about the whole process had felt rushed, pressured, like I was being swept along by a current I couldn't control. Keisha's enthusiasm seemed almost manic, and Marcus had been unusually interested in the details of my banking and investment plans. "We should celebrate," Keisha said as we drove toward my new apartment at Sunset Gardens. "This is such a huge accomplishment, Grandma. You've just secured your entire future. If you're watching this and you have elderly relatives, please pay attention to what I'm about to tell you. Because what happened next is happening to thousands of seniors across the country, and most of them never see it coming until it's too late." The first red flag should have been how quickly Keisha volunteered to help me set up my new banking arrangements. She insisted that managing such a large sum of money would be overwhelming for me, that I needed professional guidance to ensure my investments were properly diversified and my monthly expenses were automatically managed. "I work with high-net-worth clients every day," she reminded me as we sat in the financial planner's office she'd recommended. "I know exactly what kind of accounts and investment strategies will work best for someone in your situation." The financial planner, a serious man named David Chen, seemed competent and trustworthy. He explained how my money would be invested in a mix of conservative bonds and dividend-paying stocks, how the monthly distributions would be automatically deposited into my checking account to cover my living expenses, how everything was designed for stability and predictable income rather than aggressive growth. But when it came time to sign the paperwork, Keisha made a suggestion that would haunt me for months to come. "Grandma," she said, her voice casual and caring, "I think you should add me as a power of attorney on all your accounts. Not because I think you can't handle your own finances, but just as a safety net. If something happens to you, if you get sick or have an accident, I'll be able to manage your affairs without having to go through legal proceedings." It made sense. I was 72 years old, and while I felt healthy and sharp, I'd seen too many of my friends struggle with sudden health crises that left their families scrambling to manage financial and medical decisions. Having Keisha as my power of attorney seemed like responsible planning, a way to ensure that someone I trusted would be able to act on my behalf if I became incapacitated. I signed the documents giving her limited power of attorney over my financial accounts, with the understanding that she would only use that authority in emergencies or if I specifically asked for her help with complex financial decisions. The arrangement was supposed to provide peace of mind for both of us. She wouldn't have to worry about my welfare, and I wouldn't have to worry about my family being unable to help me if something happened. The first few months at Sunset Gardens were actually pleasant. My apartment was comfortable and modern, with a view of the gardens that reminded me of my old backyard. I made friends with other residents, joined the book club, and started taking watercolor painting classes that rekindled a passion I'd abandoned decades earlier when life became too busy for hobbies. Keisha visited regularly, always bringing flowers or small gifts, always asking about my activities and my new friends. She seemed genuinely interested in my adjustment to community living, and I felt grateful to have a granddaughter who cared so much about my happiness and well-being. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The first sign was when I tried to access my online banking account and discovered that my password had been changed. When I called the bank to reset it, they informed me that my account had been flagged for additional security measures due to unusual activity patterns. "What kind of unusual activity?" I asked the customer service representative, feeling a flutter of anxiety in my chest. "I'm not able to discuss specific details over the phone, Mrs. Washington," she replied, "but I can tell you that your power of attorney has been making regular transfers and investment changes. If you'd like to review the activity, you'll need to visit a branch office with proper identification." Regular transfers and investment changes. I hadn't authorized any transfers or changes to my investment strategy. According to the plan David Chen had outlined, my accounts were supposed to remain stable, with only the monthly distributions for my living expenses being moved from investments to checking. When I called Keisha to ask about the bank's concerns, her response was smooth and reassuring. "Oh, that's just David making some adjustments to optimize your returns, Grandma. The market has been volatile lately, and he's been moving money around to take advantage of better opportunities. I've been working with him to make sure you're getting the best possible returns on your investments." But I hadn't authorized David Chen to make changes to my investment strategy, and I certainly hadn't authorized Keisha to work with him on my behalf without consulting me first. The power of attorney was supposed to be for emergencies, not for ongoing management of my financial affairs. "I'd like to be involved in these decisions," I told her. "This is my money, and I want to understand what's happening with it." "Of course, Grandma," she said quickly. "I just didn't want to bother you with all the technical details. You seemed so happy with your new life at Sunset Gardens, and I thought you'd prefer to focus on enjoying yourself rather than worrying about market fluctuations and portfolio adjustments." Her explanation made sense on the surface, but something about her tone bothered me. There was a dismissiveness there, a subtle implication that financial matters were too complex for me to understand, that I should be grateful she was handling these boring details so I could focus on more appropriate activities for someone my age. I decided to visit the bank branch the next day to review my account activity in person. What I discovered there made my blood run cold and changed everything I thought I knew about my granddaughter and my future. The bank manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, spread printouts of my account statements across her desk and walked me through 6 months of transactions that I had never authorized or even known about. Over the course of those 6 months, nearly $200,000 had been transferred out of my investment accounts and into a checking account that I didn't recognize. "This checking account," Mrs. Rodriguez explained, pointing to a series of transfers, "appears to be jointly owned by you and Keisha Washington. The transfers have been happening regularly, about $15,000 per month, a joint checking account with Keisha. I had never opened a joint checking account with my granddaughter. I had never authorized the creation of any account that she could access without my explicit permission for each transaction. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never opened a joint account with anyone." Mrs. Rodriguez's expression grew concerned. "Mrs. Washington, do you have the paperwork from when this account was opened? It would have required your signature and identification." I didn't have any paperwork because I had never opened the account. But as Mrs. Rodriguez continued reviewing the statements, the picture became clear and devastating. The joint account had been opened 3 weeks after I'd given Keisha power of attorney, using that authority to add her name to what was essentially a new checking account funded entirely by transfers from my investment portfolio. And the withdrawals from that joint account told a story that broke my heart and shattered every assumption I'd made about my granddaughter's character and intentions. $15,000 to a luxury car dealership for a BMW lease, $25,000 to a high-end jewelry store, $38,000 to a travel agency for what appeared to be a European vacation package, $12,000 to a designer clothing boutique, $8,000 for what was labeled as home improvements, but which I later learned were renovations to the apartment Keisha shared with Marcus. My granddaughter had been systematically stealing from me for 6 months, using the power of attorney I'd trusted her with to funnel my money into a lifestyle I was unknowingly funding. Every visit, every flower arrangement, every concerned question about my well-being had been part of an elaborate performance designed to keep me distracted while she drained my life savings. But the worst was yet to come. As Mrs. Rodriguez and I continued reviewing the statements, we discovered that the monthly distributions I was supposed to be receiving from my investments, the money that was supposed to cover my living expenses at Sunset Gardens, had been redirected to the joint account as well. For the past 3 months, Keisha had been taking not just my principal investment, but also the income I needed to pay for my housing, my meals, my medical expenses. "Mrs. Washington," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, "according to these records, your investment portfolio has been depleted by almost 60%. If these withdrawals continue at the current rate, you'll have exhausted your entire life savings within 18 months. 18 months. I had gone from having enough money to live comfortably for 15 years to facing poverty in less than 2 years, and I had been completely unaware that anything was wrong. The room began spinning as the full implications hit me. I wasn't just being robbed, I was being systematically destroyed by someone I loved and trusted more than anyone else in the world. Keisha wasn't just stealing my money, she was stealing my future, my security, my ability to take care of myself as I aged. And she had been doing it all while looking me in the eye, hugging me, calling me her beloved grandmother, expressing concern for my welfare and gratitude for my love and support throughout her life. I left the bank that day feeling like a different person than the one who had walked in. The trusting, optimistic woman who had always seen the best in people, who had raised Keisha from infancy with unconditional love and support, who had believed that family bonds were sacred and unbreakable. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, more suspicious, more aware of the capacity for evil that can hide behind the most loving facades. But I was also angry, and that anger was about to fuel a transformation that would surprise everyone, including myself. Because Keisha had made one crucial mistake in her elaborate theft scheme. She had underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. I might have been a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher, but I had spent 40 years managing classroom discipline, dealing with manipulative teenagers, and recognizing lies and excuses from people who thought they were smarter than me. And I was about to show my granddaughter that the woman she thought she could easily deceive was actually someone she should have been very, very afraid of crossing. The next morning, I woke up in my apartment at Sunset Gardens, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Everything looked the same. The cheerful yellow curtains I'd hung to remind me of my old kitchen, the framed photos of family gatherings that now seemed like evidence of elaborate lies, the watercolor paintings I'd been working on that suddenly felt like the hobbies of a naive woman who no longer existed. I made my coffee in the small kitchenette, my hands shaking as I measured the grounds and waited for the machine to brew. The routine that had become comforting over the past few months now felt hollow, mechanical, like I was going through the motions of a life that had been stolen from me while I wasn't paying attention. I had spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation with Keisha over the past year, looking for signs I should have seen, clues I should have recognized. The evidence had been there all along. Her sudden increased interest in my finances, her eagerness to help me make major life decisions, the way she'd pushed for the house sale, and the power of attorney with just enough pressure to feel caring rather than controlling. But what haunted me most was remembering the look in her eyes during our conversations about senior communities and financial planning. I had interpreted that look as love and concern, but now I realized it had been calculation. She had been studying me, learning my weaknesses, identifying exactly how to manipulate my emotions and my fears to get what she wanted. The woman who had sat at my kitchen table, expressing worry about my safety and well-being, had actually been planning my financial destruction. The granddaughter who had cried with joy when I decided to sell my house had been crying because she was about to gain access to nearly $800,000 of my money. I needed to know exactly how bad the situation was, so I called David Chen's office and scheduled an emergency appointment. When I arrived at his downtown office that afternoon, his secretary ushered me into a conference room where David was waiting with a thick folder of documents and an expression that told me he'd been expecting this conversation. "Mrs. Washington," he said as I settled into the leather chair across from his massive desk, "I'm glad you called. I've been concerned about some of the instructions I've been receiving regarding your account management." Instructions from Keisha, he meant. Instructions that I had never authorized, for financial moves that I had never approved, for investment changes that were slowly but systematically destroying the security I had worked my entire life to build. David spread the documents across his desk, and the picture they painted was even worse than what I'd discovered at the bank. Not only had Keisha been transferring money to their joint account, but she had also been directing David to make increasingly risky investments with my remaining funds. Conservative bonds and dividend-paying stocks had been sold and replaced with volatile tech stocks and cryptocurrency investments that had lost significant value over the past few months. "I tried to contact you several times to confirm these investment changes," David explained, his voice carefully professional but tinged with concern. "Your granddaughter assured me that you had discussed these strategies and that you preferred to have her handle the communication to avoid confusion. She said you found the technical details overwhelming and trusted her to make decisions in your best interest." Overwhelming. There was that word again, the same condescending term Keisha had been using for months to justify excluding me from decisions about my own money and my own life. I was beginning to understand that this wasn't just theft. It was a systematic campaign to convince everyone around me that I was incompetent to manage my own affairs. "David," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, "I never authorized any investment changes. I never told Keisha to communicate with you on my behalf about anything other than true emergencies. And I certainly never agreed to put my life savings into cryptocurrency and tech stocks." His expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Mrs. Washington, if that's true, then we have a serious problem. The power of attorney documents your granddaughter has been using appear to be legitimate, but if you're saying she's been acting outside the scope of your actual authorization..." "She's been stealing from me," I said simply, "for months, and she's been using your services to help her do it." David's face went pale. As a financial advisor, he was legally required to act in his client's best interests, and if he had been unknowingly facilitating financial elder abuse, his professional license and his firm's reputation were in serious jeopardy. "What do you want to do?" he asked. What I wanted to do was scream. What I wanted to do was call Keisha and demand explanations and apologies and the immediate return of every penny she had stolen. What I wanted to do was cry for the loss of the granddaughter I thought I knew, for the betrayal of trust that had shattered my faith in the people I loved most. But what I was going to do was something much more strategic and much more devastating. "I want you to document everything," I told David. "Every instruction you received from Keisha, every investment change, every transfer, every communication. I want a complete record of how she's been manipulating my accounts without my knowledge or consent. And then I'm going to take back control of my life and make sure she faces consequences for what she's done to me." Over the next week, I became a different woman. The trusting grandmother who had always given people the benefit of the doubt was replaced by someone methodical, suspicious, and absolutely determined to uncover the full extent of Keisha's betrayal. I hired a private investigator named Robert Kim, a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes and elder abuse cases. Robert was a quiet, thorough man in his 50s who listened to my story without judgment and immediately understood the sophisticated nature of what Keisha had been doing. "This isn't impulse theft," he explained as we sat in his modest office reviewing the financial documents I'd gathered. "This is a carefully planned, long-term scheme. Your granddaughter has been positioning herself for months to gain access to your assets, and she's been very smart about how she's done it." Robert's investigation revealed details that made my stomach turn. The joint checking account hadn't been opened impulsively after I'd given Keisha power of attorney. It had been planned weeks in advance, with Keisha visiting the bank multiple times to discuss the process and requirements. She had researched the specific language needed in power of attorney documents to give her broad financial authority, and she had recommended David Chen as my financial advisor specifically because he was known to work closely with families rather than insisting on direct client communication. Even more disturbing, Robert discovered that Keisha had been researching senior communities and real estate values in my neighborhood for over a year before Jerome died. She had been planning this theft since before I became a widow, waiting for the right opportunity to convince me to liquidate my biggest asset and consolidate my wealth in accounts she could access. "The boyfriend, Marcus, appears to be involved as well," Robert told me during one of our meetings. "The real estate agent who handled your house sale is a business associate of his, and they've been splitting the commission on senior community referrals. Every step of this process has been designed to maximize the amount of money flowing through accounts your granddaughter can control. My house sale, my choice of senior community, my financial advisor, even my banking arrangements. All of it had been manipulated by people who saw me not as a family member deserving love and respect, but as a mark to be conned out of my life savings." But Robert's investigation also revealed something that would become the key to my revenge. Keisha had been sloppy about covering her tracks. The lavish lifestyle she'd been funding with my money had created a paper trail of receipts, credit card statements, and social media posts that documented exactly how she'd been spending the money she'd stolen from me. The BMW she was driving had been purchased with a cashier's check drawn from our joint account. The European vacation she and Marcus had taken the previous month had been paid for entirely with transfers from my investment portfolio. The designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the apartment renovations, all of it had been funded by a 72-year-old woman's life savings, and all of it was documented in financial records that would be devastating evidence in a criminal prosecution. "Do you want to involve law enforcement?" Robert asked. I thought about that question for a long time. Pressing criminal charges against Keisha would mean publicly admitting that I'd been victimized by my own granddaughter, that I'd been foolish enough to trust someone who had been planning my destruction for over a year. It would mean family shame, media attention, and the permanent destruction of any relationship I might still hope to salvage with the little girl I'd helped raise. But it would also mean justice. And more importantly, it would mean protecting other potential victims from Keisha's manipulations. "Yes," I told Robert, "I want her arrested. But first, I want to confront her myself. I want her to know that I know exactly what she's been doing, and I want to see her face when she realizes that the grandmother she thought she could easily deceive has been building a case against her." Robert looked concerned. "Mrs. Washington, confronting her directly could be dangerous. If she realizes you're onto her scheme, she might accelerate the theft or try to cover her tracks. It might be better to let law enforcement handle the confrontation." But I had spent months being manipulated and lied to by someone I loved, and I needed to look her in the eye when I revealed that her game was over. I needed to see her reaction when she realized that the woman she'd been systematically destroying was stronger and smarter than she'd ever imagined. "I'll be careful," I promised Robert, "but I need to do this my way." That evening, I called Keisha and invited her to dinner at my apartment. I told her I had been feeling lonely and would appreciate some company, that I missed our regular Thursday dinners and wanted to cook for her like I used to when she was little. She arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, carrying a bouquet of yellow roses and wearing a new designer dress that I now knew had been purchased with my money. She hugged me at the door and complimented the smell of the pot roast I'd been cooking all afternoon, the same recipe I'd made for her countless times throughout her childhood. "You look tired, Grandma Dorothy," she said as we settled at my small dining table. "Are you feeling okay? Have you been taking your blood pressure medication?" The concern in her voice sounded so genuine, so loving, that for a moment I almost doubted what I'd discovered about her. This was the same granddaughter who had held my hand at Jerome's funeral, who had helped me pack up my house, who had assured me that she would always be there to take care of me as I aged. But then I remembered the bank statements, the unauthorized investments, the joint account I'd never opened, and I felt my resolve strengthen. "I've been better," I told her, as I served our plates. "Actually, I've been having some concerns about my finances. I went to the bank last week to review my accounts, and there were some transactions I didn't understand." I watched her face carefully as I said this, looking for any sign of guilt or panic. What I saw instead was a flash of irritation, quickly covered by an expression of patient concern. "What kind of transactions?" she asked, cutting her pot roast with steady hands. "You know how confusing bank statements can be, especially with all the investment activity David has been managing for you." The casualness of her response was chilling. She wasn't even going to pretend to be surprised or concerned about my financial confusion. In her mind, I was just a confused old woman who didn't understand the complexities of money management, someone who needed to be reassured and redirected rather than taken seriously. "Well," I said, taking a bite of mashed potatoes, "there was a joint checking account that I don't remember opening, and some large transfers that I don't remember authorizing." Keisha nodded sympathetically. "Oh, that's the account I opened to help manage your monthly expenses. Remember? We talked about how it would be easier if I could help you with bill paying and budgeting, especially since some of the senior community fees can be confusing." We had never talked about joint accounts or bill paying assistance, but she delivered this lie with such confidence, such warmth, that someone who hadn't seen the bank records might have believed they had simply forgotten a conversation. "And the investments?" I asked. "David mentioned that he's been making some changes to my portfolio based on your recommendations. Just minor adjustments to improve your returns," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "The market has been so volatile lately, and I've been working with David to make sure your money is positioned for the best possible growth. You don't need to worry about the technical details, Grandma. That's what I'm here for." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable now that I was listening for it. Every sentence was designed to make me feel incompetent, confused, grateful for her guidance rather than suspicious of her motives. "Keisha," I said quietly, setting down my fork, "I know about the BMW. I know about the European vacation. I know about the jewelry and the clothes and the apartment renovations. I know you've been stealing from me for months." The change in her expression was instantaneous and devastating. The mask of loving concern slipped away, replaced by something cold and calculating that I had never seen in her face before. For a moment, we stared at each other across my dinner table, the silence heavy with the weight of everything that could never be taken back. Then she laughed, actually laughed, a bitter sound that chilled me to the bone. "Stealing?" she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge I'd never heard before. "Grandma, I've been managing your money better than you ever could. Do you have any idea how complicated your financial situation is? How much work it's been to optimize your investments and protect your assets?" The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, she was trying to frame her theft as a favor she'd been doing for me. "Protect my assets?" I repeated. "By spending $200,000 on luxury items for yourself?" Her expression hardened. "I've been taking a small management fee for the work I've been doing on your behalf." "Every financial advisor charges fees, Grandma. The difference is that I actually care about your well-being instead of just seeing you as a source of commission income." A management fee. She was calling her systematic theft of my life savings a management fee. "A management fee that I never agreed to pay," I said, "for services I never requested. Using money you transferred from accounts without my permission." Keisha stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against my kitchen floor. "You know what, Grandma? Maybe this conversation is exactly what we needed to have, because I'm tired of pretending that you're capable of managing your own affairs." The venom in her voice was shocking, but also revealing. This was who she really was, underneath the performance of loving granddaughter, someone who saw me as incompetent, who believed she was entitled to my money, who felt justified in stealing from me because she viewed me as too old and too stupid to manage my own life. You were living in that big house alone, completely overwhelmed by basic maintenance, with no understanding of how to invest or manage the kind of money you inherited from Grandpa Jerome, she continued, pacing around my small living room. I saved you from making terrible financial decisions. I found you a safe place to live, where you don't have to worry about anything. I've been protecting you from your own incompetence. In her twisted logic, stealing my money had been an act of kindness. Forcing me to sell my house and move to a senior community had been saving me from myself. Lying to me for months about financial transactions had been protecting me from complexity I couldn't handle. And you've been very well compensated for your protection, I said calmly. Keisha stopped pacing and turned to face me. You have no idea what it's cost me to manage your care. The time I've spent dealing with your medical appointments, your insurance claims, your bills, your constant need for attention and reassurance. Do you think that's been free? Do you think my time isn't worth anything? There it was, the resentment she'd been hiding behind her performance of devotion. In her mind, I was a burden who owed her compensation for the inconvenience of my existence, an elderly relative whose money she deserved as payment for tolerating my presence in her life. So, this was always the plan, I said. Convince me to sell my house, consolidate my money in accounts you could access, and then gradually drain my savings while making me feel grateful for your help. She shrugged, her mask completely gone now. It was a practical arrangement that benefited both of us. You got safety and security, and I got fair compensation for managing your care. Fair compensation. $200,000 in luxury purchases was fair compensation for visiting me once a week and filling out some paperwork. But then Keisha said something that revealed just how thoroughly she had underestimated me. And frankly, Grandma, what are you going to do about it? You're 72 years old, living in a senior community with no legal or financial expertise. You signed power of attorney documents that give me broad authority to manage your accounts. Every transaction I've made has been technically legal under the terms of that agreement. She thought she had covered her tracks perfectly. She thought I was powerless to challenge her, too old and too naive to understand the complexities of financial law, too dependent on her to risk confronting her theft. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I stood up slowly, walked to my kitchen drawer, and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. When I set it on the table between us, Keisha's confident expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. "What's that?" she asked. "Bank statements showing every unauthorized transfer you've made from my accounts," I said, opening the folder. "Credit card receipts for luxury purchases made with my money. Documentation of investment changes I never approved. A complete financial forensic analysis conducted by a private investigator who specializes in elder abuse cases." Keisha's face went pale. "You hired an investigator?" "I also contacted the district attorney's office about filing criminal charges for financial elder abuse, fraud, and theft. And I've been in touch with the FBI about your use of forged documents and interstate financial crimes." The folder contained everything Robert had gathered over the past week, evidence that would be devastating in a criminal prosecution, proof that Keisha's theft scheme was even more sophisticated and premeditated than I had initially realized. "The power of attorney you've been using to justify your actions," I continued. "It specifically limits your authority to emergency situations and requires my written consent for any major financial transactions. Every transfer you've made, every investment change, every dollar you've stolen has been a criminal act." Keisha stared at the documents spread across my table, her confident facade crumbling as she realized the magnitude of the evidence against her. "Grandma," she said, her voice suddenly small and young, "you don't understand. I was trying to help you. Everything I did was for your benefit. But I was done being manipulated by someone who had spent months systematically destroying my financial security while pretending to love me. Tomorrow morning," I told her, "the police will be issuing a warrant for your arrest. The FBI will be executing search warrants on your apartment, your bank accounts, and your employment records. Every asset you've purchased with my money will be seized as evidence." She sank into her chair, the reality of her situation finally hitting her. "You can't do this to me. I'm your granddaughter. I'm family. Family doesn't steal from each other," I said. "Family doesn't lie and manipulate and exploit trust for personal gain. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was nothing more than a source of money for your lifestyle." Keisha tried one last desperate manipulation, tears flowing down her cheeks as she reached for my hands. Grandma Dorothy, please. I made mistakes, but I love you. I've always loved you. You raised me when my own mother couldn't. You're the most important person in my life." The tears looked real, and for a moment, my heart ached for the little girl she used to be, the child who had called me her best friend, who had spent countless afternoons in my kitchen learning to bake cookies and helping me tend my garden. But that little girl was gone, replaced by someone who had calculated exactly how much my love was worth in dollars and cents. "If you loved me," I said, pulling my hands away from hers, "you never would have stolen from me. If I was important to you, you never would have put me at risk of poverty in my old age. If you cared about me at all, you would have protected my security instead of destroying it." I walked to my front door and opened it, gesturing for her to leave. "Goodbye, Keisha. The next time I see you, it will be in a courtroom." She stood slowly, her designer dress wrinkled, her makeup smeared with tears, looking nothing like the confident young woman who had arrived for dinner 2 hours earlier. "This will destroy our whole family," she said as she reached the doorway. "Is your money really worth more to you than your own granddaughter?" It was her final attempt to make me feel guilty for her choices, to frame her arrest as my fault rather than the natural consequence of her crimes. "My money represents my security, my independence, and my ability to take care of myself as I age," I told her. "You tried to steal all of that from me while making me grateful for the privilege. So yes, protecting myself from someone who would do that to me is worth more than preserving a relationship built on lies and theft." After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal, feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely relieved. For months, I had been living with a vague sense that something was wrong, that I was missing important information about my own life. Now I knew the truth, and while it was devastating, it was also empowering. I was no longer a victim being manipulated by someone I trusted. I was a woman who had discovered the truth and was taking action to protect herself and seek justice. But I also knew that the hardest part was still ahead of me. Because exposing Keisha's crimes would mean facing the judgment of family members who might blame me for destroying a young woman's life, dealing with the media attention that often surrounds financial elder abuse cases, and rebuilding a life that had been shattered by betrayal. However, as I prepared for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not for reconciliation with Keisha, which was impossible, but for the possibility of reclaiming my autonomy, my dignity, and my future. The grandmother, who had been easily manipulated and gradually isolated, was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we love most, and that protecting ourselves from that hurt is not cruelty, it's survival. If you have elderly relatives or friends, please take a moment to check in on their financial well-being. Ask direct questions about who has access to their accounts, who's helping them make major decisions, and whether they feel pressured by anyone to make financial changes they're not comfortable with. Because what happened to me is happening to thousands of seniors across the country, and most of them never see it coming until it's too late. The morning after my confrontation with Keisha, I woke up feeling like I was living in someone else's life. Everything in my apartment looked the same, but I felt fundamentally different, sharper, more alert, like I had been sleepwalking for months and had finally opened my eyes to see the world clearly. I made my coffee and sat at my kitchen table with Robert Kim's business card in my hand, knowing that the phone call I was about to make would set in motion events that could never be undone. Once I gave law enforcement the evidence we'd gathered, there would be no going back, no possibility of handling this privately within the family. But as I thought about the $200,000 Keisha had stolen, about the monthly transfers that were supposed to support my living expenses, about the systematic way she had been draining my future while looking me in the eye and calling me her beloved grandmother, I felt my resolve harden. I dialed Robert's number at exactly 8 o'clock. "She knows we're on to her," I told him when he answered. "I confronted her last night, and she admitted everything. She's not even pretending it wasn't theft anymore. She's claiming it was justified." Robert's voice was calm and professional. "How did she react when you told her about the criminal investigation?" "She was shocked at first, then angry, then desperate. She tried to manipulate me with tears and family guilt, but when that didn't work, she basically told me I was too old and incompetent to manage my own money anyway." "That's actually good for our case," Robert said. "Admissions like that, especially the part about viewing you as incompetent, will help prosecutors establish criminal intent rather than just poor judgment. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in the district attorney's office with Robert, Detective Sarah Martinez, and Assistant District Attorney Lisa Wong, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes against seniors. The conference room was sterile and intimidating, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and serious. "Mrs. Washington," Ada Wong said as she reviewed the evidence Robert had compiled, "this is one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases I've seen. Your granddaughter and her boyfriend didn't just steal from you. They created an elaborate scheme designed to gradually drain your entire life savings while maintaining plausible deniability." She spread photographs across the table, showing Keisha's luxury purchases, Marcus's real estate connections, and the paper trail of forged documents and unauthorized transactions that painted a picture of calculated, long-term financial exploitation. "The good news is that we have enough evidence for multiple felony charges," Detective Martinez added. "Financial elder abuse, grand theft, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. This isn't a case where we'll have to rely on circumstantial evidence or victim testimony alone." "What's the bad news?" I asked. Ada Wong's expression grew serious. "Cases like this often tear families apart. Your other relatives may blame you for pressing charges, especially if they were unaware of what Keisha was doing. And defense attorneys in these cases typically try to portray elderly victims as confused or vindictive, people who are misunderstanding innocent financial assistance." I thought about my daughter Denise, Keisha's mother, who lived in Atlanta and had always been proud of her daughter's financial success. I thought about my sister Marie, who had always favored Keisha among my grandchildren and who would be devastated to learn about her crimes. I thought about the extended family gatherings that would never be the same, the holidays that would be marked by absence and awkwardness. But then I thought about the other seniors who might become Keisha's victims if she wasn't stopped, about the elderly people across the country who were being manipulated and robbed by their own family members, about the message it would send if people like Keisha faced no consequences for their crimes. "I understand the risks," I told Ada Wong, "but I want to proceed with prosecution." The investigation moved quickly once law enforcement became involved. Within 48 hours, search warrants had been executed on Keisha's apartment, Marcus's real estate office, and the storage unit where they had been keeping luxury items purchased with my money. The FBI had frozen their bank accounts and begun tracing the financial networks they had used to launder and hide the stolen funds. Detective Martinez called me on Friday afternoon with an update that was both satisfying and heartbreaking. "We arrested Keisha this morning at her workplace," she told me. "She was detained without incident, but she requested to speak with you before being formally booked." The idea of seeing Keisha in handcuffs, of facing her across a police station interview room, made my stomach turn. But I also felt a strange sense of closure, like this was a conversation that needed to happen for both of us. What did she want to say? She claims she has information about other potential victims, other elderly people she may have targeted through her work as a financial advisor. She says she'll only discuss it with you. The possibility that Keisha had been victimizing other seniors made my blood run cold. If her scheme to rob me had been successful, how many other elderly people had she identified as potential targets? How many families had she infiltrated with her charm and professional credentials? I agreed to meet with her at the police station, with Detective Martinez present and the conversation recorded for evidence. When I walked into the interview room and saw Keisha sitting at a metal table in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back and her face bare of makeup, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. "Grandma Dorothy," she said when I sat down across from her, "thank you for coming. I know you probably hate me right now." Her voice was small and defeated, nothing like the confident young woman who had been stealing from me for months or the angry person who had tried to justify her crimes during our dinner confrontation. "I don't hate you, Keisha," I said, and I was surprised to realize it was true. "But I don't know who you are anymore." She started crying then, not the manipulative tears she had used to try to change my mind, but the broken sobs of someone who had finally understood the magnitude of what she had lost. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "It started small, just a few $1,000s that I told myself I would pay back when my commissions improved. But then it got easier, and I got greedy, and I convinced myself that you wouldn't miss the money because you had so much." "Detective Martinez said you have information about other victims," I said. Other elderly people you've targeted. Keisha's face crumpled. There are 3 others. Clients at my firm whose families trusted me to help them with financial planning after they lost spouses or became too ill to manage their own affairs. I've taken money from all of them, but not as much as I took from you. 3 other families destroyed by someone they had trusted to help them navigate the most vulnerable periods of their lives. 3 other elderly people who had been systematically robbed while believing they were receiving professional financial guidance. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I want you to know that you weren't stupid for trusting me, she said, looking directly at me for the first time since I'd entered the room. This wasn't about you being naive or easy to manipulate. I'm a predator, Grandma. I target elderly people specifically because they tend to trust family members and professionals, and I exploit that trust for money. The admission was both devastating and liberating. For months, I had been questioning my own judgment, wondering how I could have been so blind to what was happening. But hearing Keisha describe her crimes as predatory behavior rather than opportunistic theft helped me understand that her betrayal was about her character, not my failure. The other victims, I said, are you willing to help them recover their money? She nodded. I'll cooperate with the investigation completely. I'll provide account information, transaction records, everything the police need to trace where the money went and how to get it back. It wasn't redemption, and it wouldn't undo the damage she had caused, but it was something resembling accountability. Keisha, I said as I prepared to leave, I need you to understand something. What you did to me wasn't just theft. You destroyed my trust in the people I love most. You made me question my own judgment and my ability to take care of myself. You stole my sense of security and my faith in family bonds. She was crying harder now, her shoulders shaking with the weight of what she had done. I know, she whispered. I know I can never fix what I broke, but I want you to know that everything you gave me when I was growing up, all the love and support and guidance, that was real. The person who did this to you isn't who you raised me to be. I stood up to leave, feeling emotionally drained but also strangely peaceful. No, I said, it isn't. And that's the saddest part of all of this. The criminal proceedings moved forward quickly. Keisha's cooperation with the investigation led to the recovery of most of the stolen funds and helped prosecutors build cases against Marcus and several other co-conspirators who had been running similar schemes throughout the Bay Area. She ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges and was sentenced to 5 years in state prison, with the possibility of early release if she continued cooperating with investigations into financial crimes against seniors. Marcus received a longer sentence due to his role in creating forged documents and his history of previous fraud convictions. But the legal victory was only part of my recovery. The bigger challenge was rebuilding a life that had been shattered by betrayal and learning to trust my own judgment again after being systematically manipulated for months. I decided to leave Sunset Gardens. The senior community itself was lovely, and the staff had been nothing but kind and supportive throughout the investigation. But staying there felt like accepting the diminished life that Keisha had planned for me. I wanted to make my own choices about where and how to live, based on my actual needs and preferences, rather than someone else's manipulation. With most of my stolen money recovered, I was able to purchase a small house in Berkeley, close enough to my old neighborhood to feel familiar, but different enough to represent a fresh start. It was a modest place with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen big enough for serious cooking, and a backyard where I could grow tomatoes and roses again. Moving into my own house at 73 felt like reclaiming not just my independence, but my identity. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what other people thought I should want or what would be most convenient for my family. I also decided to go public with my story. Ada Wong had been right about the potential for media attention, but instead of seeing it as something to endure, I began viewing it as an opportunity to help other seniors recognize and prevent financial elder abuse. My first interview was with the local ABC affiliate, a 10-minute segment that aired during the evening news. I was nervous about appearing on television, worried that I would seem like a foolish old woman who had been easily duped by a granddaughter everyone trusted. But the response was overwhelming. Within days of the interview airing, I received dozens of calls and letters from other seniors who had experienced similar betrayals, from adult children who were concerned about elderly parents, and from financial professionals who wanted to learn how to better protect their older clients. The producer at ABC asked me to participate in a longer documentary about financial elder abuse, which led to speaking engagements at senior centers and community organizations throughout Northern California. I found myself becoming an advocate for something I had never planned to be an expert on, but the work felt meaningful in ways that surprised me. "Your story is powerful because you fought back," said Dr. Jennifer Chen, a gerontologist at UC Berkeley who became a friend and collaborator. "Most victims of financial elder abuse never recover their money or see their abusers prosecuted. You refuse to accept being victimized, and that gives other people hope." 6 months after Keisha's arrest, I received a letter from my daughter Denise. She had been devastated by the revelations about her daughter's crimes and had struggled with guilt over not recognizing the warning signs. For weeks after the arrest, our phone conversations had been strained and awkward, filled with the weight of everything that couldn't be said. "Mom," she wrote, "I've spent months trying to understand how Keisha could have done this to you, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. You raised me to believe that family members protect each other, not exploit each other. What happened to you wasn't your fault, and I'm proud of how you handled it." The letter continued for 3 pages, with Denise expressing admiration for my decision to press charges despite the family consequences, gratitude for my efforts to help other potential victims, and regret for not being more involved in my life after Jerome's death. "I should have been the one helping you navigate widowhood and financial planning," she wrote. "If I had been more present, more aware of what was happening, maybe I could have prevented this." I called her that evening, and we had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. We talked about the guilt she carried for being absent during my most vulnerable period, about the shame I felt for being deceived by someone I loved, about the ways that family relationships can become complicated by distance and assumptions and failure to communicate. "I don't blame you for what Keisha did," I told her, "but I do want us to have a different kind of relationship going forward. I want you to see me as someone who's still capable of making her own decisions, not as someone who needs to be managed or protected from complexity." That conversation marked the beginning of a new relationship with Denise, one based on mutual respect rather than the dutiful obligation she had felt toward an aging mother. She began visiting more frequently, not to check on my welfare, but to spend time with me as an adult friend. We started taking trips together, cooking elaborate meals, and talking about books and politics and life in ways we hadn't since she was young. A year after the arrests, I was invited to speak at a conference on financial crimes against seniors in Washington, D.C. The audience included law enforcement officials, social workers, banking professionals, and policymakers who were working to strengthen protections for elderly Americans. Standing at the podium, in a hotel ballroom filled with experts, I felt a strange sense of pride in how far I had come from the confused, grieving widow who had signed power of attorney documents without fully understanding their implications. Financial elder abuse isn't just about money, I told the audience. It's about the systematic undermining of an older person's autonomy, dignity, and sense of self-worth. The people who commit these crimes don't just steal our savings. They steal our confidence in our own judgment and our faith in the people we love most. I talked about the warning signs I had missed, the manipulation techniques that had been used against me, and the importance of treating elderly people as full adults, capable of understanding and participating in decisions about their own lives. "The most insidious part of what happened to me," I said, "was how my granddaughter convinced everyone around me that I was too old and too confused to manage my own affairs, when what I actually needed was honest information and respectful support." After my presentation, a woman in her 50s approached me with tears in her eyes. "My mother is going through something similar with my brother," she said, "but she's afraid to speak up because she doesn't want to destroy the family." What would you tell her? It was a question I'd been asked dozens of times over the past year, and my answer was always the same. I'd tell her that people who exploit elderly family members have already destroyed the family, I said. Protecting herself isn't destroying anything. It's refusing to let the destruction continue. 2 years after Keisha's arrest, I received an unexpected letter from her. She was eligible for early release due to her cooperation with other investigations, and she wanted to ask for my forgiveness and the possibility of rebuilding our relationship. I read the letter sitting in my backyard garden, surrounded by the tomato plants and rose bushes I had grown from seeds and cuttings, in the house I had chosen for myself, in the life I had rebuilt through my own decisions and efforts. The letter was well written and seemed sincere. Keisha acknowledged the full extent of her crimes, expressed genuine remorse for the pain she had caused, and outlined the therapy and education programs she had completed in prison. She talked about understanding how her actions had been predatory and inexcusable, and about her desire to spend the rest of her life making amends. But as I finished reading, I realized that forgiveness and reconciliation were two different things. I could forgive Keisha for her crimes. Forgiveness was something I could give myself for my own peace of mind. But rebuilding a relationship with someone who had demonstrated such a fundamental lack of respect for my autonomy and well-being was not something I was willing or obligated to do. I wrote back a brief letter explaining that while I wished her well in her rehabilitation and her future life, I would not be resuming our relationship. Some betrayals, I explained, are too fundamental to recover from, and some trust, once broken, can never be rebuilt. The grandmother you knew, I wrote, was someone who prioritized family harmony over personal boundaries, who accepted manipulation in the name of love, who allowed other people to make decisions about her life because she thought that was what good family members did. That woman is gone, replaced by someone who understands that protecting herself from exploitation isn't selfish, it's necessary. I mailed the letter without regret, feeling at peace with my decision to prioritize my own well-being over the possibility of redemption for someone who had chosen to view me as a source of money rather than a person deserving respect. Today, 3 years after discovering Keisha's theft, I live in my small house in Berkeley, surrounded by the life I have chosen rather than the life others planned for me. I continue to speak about financial elder abuse. I serve on the board of a nonprofit organization that provides legal assistance to seniors, and I've written a book about my experience that will be published next year. Most importantly, I've learned that being older doesn't mean being powerless, that needing help doesn't mean surrendering autonomy, and that family love should never come with the price of financial exploitation or emotional manipulation. The money Keisha stole has been mostly recovered and reinvested according to my own preferences and priorities. But the more valuable thing I recovered was my sense of agency, my understanding that I have the right and the responsibility to make my own decisions about my life, my money, and my relationships. I think about Jerome sometimes, wondering what he would think of the woman I've become since his death. The Dorothy he married was eager to please, quick to defer to others' judgment, afraid of conflict or confrontation. The Dorothy I am now is someone who asks hard questions, who trusts her own instincts, who refuses to accept mistreatment in the name of family loyalty. I think he would be proud of me, and more importantly, I'm proud of myself. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're being pressured to make financial decisions you're not comfortable with, if someone is managing your money without your full understanding and consent, if you feel like you're being treated as incompetent or burdensome by people who claim to love you, please remember that you have the right to ask questions, to demand answers, and to protect yourself from exploitation. Age doesn't disqualify you from autonomy. Needing help doesn't mean surrendering control. And anyone who truly loves you will respect your right to make informed decisions about your own life. The people who want to exploit you will always have excuses for why their control over your life is necessary, beneficial, or protective. But the people who truly want to help you will encourage your independence, support your decision-making capacity, and treat you with the dignity and respect you deserve. I learned these lessons the hard way, through betrayal and theft and the shattering of everything I thought I knew about family love. But I also learned that it's never too late to reclaim your power, to rebuild your life according to your own values and priorities, and to become the person you were always meant to be. Don't let anyone convince you that you're too old, too confused, or too vulnerable to protect yourself. You're stronger than they want you to believe, and you deserve better than they're offering you. Trust yourself. You're worth it.